The good old days of good old monster movies are back. Tremors.
It was funny. It's humongous. Slimy. Gross. Full of goo.
It's scary.
Yeah, we'll take your word for it.
The scariest monster movie since Aliens, says sneak previews.
Bloodthirsty, that creature. Action-packed.
It's a wild film.
And Time magazine raves Tremors is bound to become a classic. Tremors, rated PG-13.
Hey everyone, Brian and Jerome here, and this is Pantheon Plus. I'm your host for this month. Here it's Creature Feature Month, Week 2, and I can't wait to get into this one. It's Tremors from 1990 with Kevin Bacon, Fred Ward, Michael Gross. This cast is great. Reba McEntire. I've been waiting to review this for a while. I've been trying to get Jerome to watch this, and we finally got Creature Feature Month to get to happen. And I finally got him to watch it for the first time, and I've seen this movie like 30 times in comparison, so this is going to be a fun discussion. But before we get into that, please leave a 4 or 5-star review so more people can find the real world and the podcast and the good work that those folks are doing, and helps the algorithm and whatnot, helps more people find the show. But I just can't wait to get into this movie, Jerome. And I know this was your first watch. I've seen this so many times. I rented it as a kid, watched it on TV as a kid so many times. Even on Blu-ray now, it looks even better because I think the actual desert setting of this movie works so much for this movie, going for it. But yeah, what was your first impressions of watching this? Is it a classic? Did you wish you watched it as a kid? I want to know more.
I don't know if I wished I watched it as a kid. I would definitely say I wished I saw this earlier, because I think the problem with a lot of these horror franchises is you get put into a situation where you get the first movie, and then it feels like, okay, we're just going to make a million of these. And I think that's what happens with, your Nightmare on Elm Street. You end up with 8 of them, or however many. Then in this case, you're ending up with a lot of sequels. Then it's hard to say, okay, is this franchise actually good? Or is it just a situation where the original's good and then they're just kind of bastardizing the franchise? And I would compare this to Jaws in some ways, in terms of, I think Tremors is really good, and then it feels like you're getting diminishing returns on the sequels. I was impressed with many aspects of Tremors. I think this is definitely one of the better movies that we have watched in terms of ones that you've introduced me to. Brendan Fraser Month was a huge disappointment. I'm relieved to say the Creature Feature Month is not. I will say that even if Dark Rising is one of the worst movies that's ever been made, this month I would say has already been a success, because I very much enjoyed Tremors. I think this movie is very, very good. The desert setting is perfect. And quite honestly, I don't think Tremors works in an urban environment. Like, I just don't think that you would get it. Like, I feel like horror movies in general are just better when they take place in small towns, in deserts, in quieter, more isolated places. I don't know what it is, but like, even when I was watching Scream 6, and Scream 6 takes place in New York, and I was like, I'm not really feeling this. But Tremors, this desert setting, is perfect. And I love the way that the desert is shot, especially being shot on film. The director of this also directed a City Slickers. So you can really see that you have somebody who can really shoot these vistas really well. And you've got great chemistry with Fred Ward and Kevin Bacon. I think you've got a really good supporting cast in there as well. I think this is a movie that ultimately works, despite the fact that I don't know how interesting the Tremors are. Like, I don't know how interesting our creatures actually are. But when you build up the human characters, when you allow us to invest in the human characters, because remember last week, Brian, I complained about the geography and not really having a good sense of geography. Here, because you have a smaller setting, you have a much greater sense of scale. You have a much greater sense of geography, and I think that's great. And the other thing that I really like is that we kind of develop rules, just like vampires have rules, and you get into a movie's franchise like The Quiet Place. You get those kind of rules, and that's what Tremors probably most reminds me of, because just like Quiet Place, it's all about sound and vibrations and things of that nature. So Tremors is very good. It is better than last week, even significantly better, I would say. Great around the clock performances, which I'm sure we'll get into more detail. But yes, Tremors is very, very good.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy right now. Uh, Man, I loved this movie as a kid. I love this sequel a lot. I actually watched the sequel before the original movie, and yeah, I would recommend 1 and 2 for sure. 3, 4, 3 is good for nostalgia. 4, it's kind of whatever. Takes place in 1890. You got Michael Gross playing his own grandfather. Not that great. And then what I call the Michael Gross trilogy post that, I've never actually seen. You know what I mean? So it's not really interesting to me because it's just Tremors in a different location with modern B movie setting, and it doesn't really appeal to me as much. It's shot digitally, you know what I mean? It's not the same, not practical effects as much. So if people want to recommend it to me, sure. I know it's got Jamie Kennedy in 2 of them, but it doesn't appeal to me. 1 and 2 for sure, because 2 has Fred Ward, for crying out loud, and even though it was direct to VHS, it still has this cinematic feel to it, and it's got a great soundtrack. And they explore more of the lore and the mythos of the worm, so to speak. And then you kind of complete that lore with the third one. So really quickly, they start out as worms, right? They call them graboids in this movie. And then in the second movie, you find out that inside them are growing like little tiny ones that have feet and can move around, but they can only see heat. You know what I mean? So that's the gimmick of the second one. They have to like figure out a way to like get fire extinguishers and hose each other down to get cold and hide their heat sensors from the things. And then the third one, they think, oh, okay, it's just those 2 evolutionary stages. And the third one, they find out that it got the when they're doing the heat seeking things, they go into a cocoon or whatever, and they come out with like longer legs, and they could fly. And the reason they could fly is because they can release this gas from their ass. So they call them ass blasters. And then the ass blasters produce an egg, and the egg becomes the worm, and the whole process starts over again. So that's kind of how they explored the lore of the worms throughout the years. In the first movie, they wanted it to be up to you. You know what I mean? They kept saying, "Is it going to be? What are these things? Aliens? Are they? Are they old? The dinosaurs? What's going on here? Are they new species? Are they created by the government?" They never answer it, but in the second movie they do answer it, and when they find out that they're actually, they predate the fossil record, so they've been on Earth for millions of years, and one of them just, or 4 of them decided to hatch at that random time in 1990, and of course, Fred Ward's character, Bert, or not Bert, excuse me, Earl, he gets so upset because he wanted them to be aliens, and that's the whole joke in this one because he thinks they're aliens. So 1 and 2 go really well together. I really recommend it. But really quickly on the background of this movie, the writers, S.S. Wilson and Brett Maddock, they were working for the U.S. Navy at the time as like filmmakers for documentaries and stuff. Randomly came up with this idea, like, what if there was this monster in the dirt, and you can only hide on rocks to get him? And then they kind of came up with this land shark idea, and that kind of developed into this Tremors movie. Um, and so, they got the concept down. They had Ron Underwood to come on as director, and they at the time, they got Kevin Bacon to do it. Kevin Bacon was really down on his career. Like I watched this interview recently where he was talking about the movie, and at the time, like he was just really down on himself because he had a lot of bombs. Nothing was good since Flashdance, and he was about to have a child. And shit was about to change for his life, and this movie happened, and he felt like, oh great, he did another bomb. But then over the next few years, he started to realize it's becoming a cult classic because VHS was booming, yo. And I remember renting so many movies on VHS. It's different now, obviously, but the VHS boom really did have a big impact on films at the time. And that, a movie like this, where it doesn't gross as much money, it's got a mixed kind of horror comedy aspect to it. But, and in the interview, he mentions that families would find this movie on VHS and connect with it. And he says, like, Middle America really connects with it whenever fans come up to him and they talk about their favorite Kevin Bacon movies. And he says, Middle America tends to say they love Tremors more as their favorite movie of mine. So I was just very fascinated with that interview. It's on YouTube. You can just search Kevin Bacon Tremors. It's like a 40-minute interview, but it's very fascinating. Highly recommend it. And he talks about, of course, filming on location in Lone Pine, California, like a central California town, 40 miles away from, the next major town. It's on location. It's beautiful. They actually, it actually feels like the shit you see that's in the dirt, like the old car parts, all the old tools, all that shit. It just feels like it was already there before the cast and crew came down there to shoot. You know what I mean? It just feels so authentic because it is. They shot it on location. They built the sets on top of the desert, but like none of this. It was all sets, but they built it on top. But everything was on location, and it just looks so beautiful in 35 millimeter. And this is one of those rare movie or horror movies taking place during the day. And Kevin Bacon actually explicitly mentioned that it's rare that a horror movie takes place during the day. But of course, last week we mentioned Jaws, talking about alligator, excuse me, and that takes place mostly during the day. So I think there's something to it when you can draw an audience to a horror movie that kind of plays with the family adventure types, that's leaning on comedy, that's kind of for everybody. You do it right like this, man. I think it's, but the thing is, it didn't appeal to box office, right? So I guess the idea is it's not like a date type of movie. It's more of like you watch this with your family. You got the little kids kind of hiding behind the covers when the certain scenes come out. But at the end of the movie, everyone's celebrating. So I feel like this movie really connects, and I can kind of see why Kevin Bacon mentions that middle America kind of connection. And of course, filming this on location adds something to it. And it feels like these are hardworking middle class people who were just trying to get by in this random town in California, separated by everybody, and they're just kind of average Joes. And I think that's where that connection kind of comes from. And that, they spend time getting to know these characters, and that there's only 14 people in the town, right? And that allows you to get to know a lot of these people. And I think it just works in terms of like the script writing and putting the script together. And Kevin Bacon really admits that he had a great time making the movie, but of course it was a disappointment box office wise. But over the years, he's come to love it, and he says it's probably one of his favorite movie that he's ever made. And I can totally see why. Like it's just clear that like there's something special about this movie, whether it's the practical effects, whether it's the bond and the bromance, whether it's the authentic relationship between that feel of an authentic relationship between Reba McEntire and Michael Gross. Like there's a lot going on for this movie, and just incredible timing too, because Michael Gross just literally filmed the movie the day after he finished the last episode of Family Ties. And of course you got that connection to Michael J. Fox. So there's all these connections there, and I felt like this is one of Universal Pictures like hidden gems that they got so lucky with in the VHS era. And I feel like they're kind of not using the property as well as they could now, because I feel like you can just easily make a movie remake of this for like 15 million, make the money back, and have it be good.
I mean, especially in the era of Blumhouse, and especially in an era when horror movies are one of the few guaranteed successes these days, it just feels like we are in an era of these $5, $10, $15 million horror movies that are finding a lot of success. And I think A24 recently has found some success. I think you look at the last couple of years and just look at the parade of horror movies that have come to theaters and been able to find an audience. It would not surprise me if you did see Tremors just flat out rebooted by Universal in association with Blumhouse. Again, I think you're probably going to see that, because I think that this is a movie that I think has a repeatable formula to it, and I think it's something that you could do well for a lower budget. I think putting in the effort is what matters. Finding the right filmmakers is what matters, and I think in this case, I think you have a really good filmmaker putting all of this together and putting in the time. I think it's really easy to do a schlocky version of this with characters that you are not invested in, but in a lot of ways you are invested in every character, and even the character that is even Melvin, who we hate, but like he's designed that way, and even the characters within the movie hate him. So I think that's just what makes this work out. And every character has a lot of agency as well. That's something else that I appreciate. And even Finn Carter, like the main female character, I think it's really easy for her to get kind of lost in the shuffle, this damsel in distress. But like in a lot of ways, she is playing the Richard Dreyfuss character from Jaws. Like she is the scientist. She's bringing in those scientific connections, and I think that's really, really good. I think it's really fascinating. to see her just be a part of this. And we also have to talk about Reba McEntire as Bert's wife, Heather Gummer. I think she's really good. I was stunned to see her name and then to see the role that she's playing, because I think you're used to her as like in sitcoms, but here she is very much into the Second Amendment rights. And boy, there sure are a lot of guns in this movie. This is a movie that I think is ahead of its time, because I think obviously you get a lot of the Michael Myers and the Freddys in the 1980s, and you've got a lot of the slasher movies. This isn't a slasher movie. This kind of exists in its own space, and I can see why this movie did not do as well in 1990. I think here in 2023, the thing is that we are not just experiencing a successful horror run of movies, but a lot of different kinds of horror movies. I think if this movie comes out for the first time in 2023, I think it finds a much bigger audience. I think it finds a lot more success, just in terms of building this up. And I think even if you do like CGI creatures, I think it still kind of works. But again, just as I said last week, I will always prefer the practical elements. And I think in this case, you have the practical elements, and you really don't want to show the worms. And I think it works. I think this is a movie that just works. Again, we have a 96-minute movie. I think it's extremely well paced. So yeah, just a success all around.
And it's weird. It's the shortest movie out of all 7 movies. So how did figure that one out? But if they ever make a remake, I'm just gonna say this now. For the part of Earl, please get John Bernthal. I mean, that's just perfect. I mean, Fred Ward looks like his dad anyway, and I'm pretty sure they were in the same movie together anyway. So yeah, I mean, and of course Fred Ward in this movie is unfreaking believable. He's got that gruff to him, and he's kind of like that natural cowboy that this movie kind of needed. And of course you got like the young cowboy and Val, played by Kevin Bacon. So that's kind of where the movie opens up with those two. It's just Perfection Valley. It's those two. They're waking up. It's two Joe Schmoes who have I guess they're handymen for the town, and they kind of do odd jobs here and there for a certain amount of money, contractor types. They don't like where their life is going, so they're trying to figure out if we should leave or not. They have a shitty day doing jobs all around town. They decide to leave, right? As they decide to leave, here's where all the killings start happening. There's a deleted scene where there was this big earthquake that releases the monsters, but I'm glad they cut it because it adds to the mystery at the beginning. Because I feel like the first act has this mystery to it before the big reveal that really gets the anticipation up. It can start you questioning things. The characters start questioning what's going on. The audience starts questioning what's going on. So I think that big mystery at the beginning really, really helps. So you got Val and Earl, this bromance going on. They're trying to leave town, and they see old Edgar at the top of the radio tower. Edgar is a character that's kind of off screen. You just find the body, and we find out that he dehydrated, at the top of this tower. Like, why would he stay up there for so long? And that's where the mystery kind of starts. And then you see, Edgar with his head in the sand. We actually see the scene of him getting eaten. We don't know what happens, but we just get him sucked in the ground, and the sheep get eaten or whatnot. And Val and Earl, they stumble upon it and try to figure out what the hell's going on. We picked the wrong day to leave this town or whatever. And then all these little, and the dialogue, of course, is just great. There's a lot of one-liners in this movie that just work so much. Part of my French, like recurring lines, shit like that. Just good stuff all around with the dialogue. So this mystery keeps unfolding, and then of course that night is when I think, to me, the most brutal, second most brutal, Wong's death, Victor Wong, this Chow. Yeah, that was a brutal death too. But in this case, I think the horror and terror in the wife's face in the car when it's getting sucked down, and of course the naivete of the husband, the doctor character, not running the fuck away when it's clearly you should be running the fuck away instead of, hey, let's go look what's going on in that big scary sound over there. Dumb. Never, ever, ever do that. Ever.
Brian, I have to agree with you that the character is dumb, but I don't know about you, but the pandemic has given me a change of perspective on things like this, because I think pre-pandemic we would say, okay, nobody would ever act that stupid, but because of the pandemic, I'm now like, you know what? probably some people really are going to act that stupid. So I think I'm much more forgiving of those elements. I think where the issue for me is, are all the characters behaving this way? Thankfully, they're not. But I do think that it is fair to have a mix of perspectives and to have somebody be that stupid. I think it's actually pretty representative of what would actually happen. But let's be honest, nobody's as bad as Melvin.
Oh, Melvin. He's another kid in town. Did you notice he has no parents? I guess one of the notes I read I guess one of those scenes they cut is that Melvin's parents were in Vegas at the time. So that's part of the 14 people in town.
I mean, if looking at Melvin, I could see why his parents might abandon him.
Yeah, and it's not like, they worry about him. He's just the only kid one of the only kids in town. But also the daughter from Jurassic Park, the blonde girl from Jurassic Park, boom.
Yes, she is getting traumatized again here.
That's kind of what movie companies do. They'll get like actress or actor they like and put him in the same stuff over and over for the company. You see that Timothy Chalamet and working all over the place.
So Ariana Richards, quite a run. She has Tremors, Jurassic Park, and Angus. That is quite a trio of movies.
My God, I haven't thought of Angus in years. That's that Bully movie, right? My God.
Yep, one of George Scott's last performances. Yep.
Wow. Okay, there you go. Full circles, I guess, like we mentioned last week. But in this case, so the big mystery is like, what the fuck is going on? So they go back to town and they tell them they find the dead bodies, and they're like, okay, we'll give you some horses. Just get out of here. Because what happens is these construction workers that were working on the road get eaten by the worms, or one of them gets eaten. The other one gets crushed by the rocks because of the repercussions of the event. And what happens so the rocks just block the road. They're stuck. And it's like, oh, fuck, great. How convenient, right, for the plot. So they're trying to ride out with the horses out of town, and the horses get eaten, and they start running away because they realize there's something in the ground. And then when they jump at this gap, their junction or whatever, they fucking jump, and there's this concrete. And the thing hits the concrete. The worm hits the concrete, and it's just like, God damn, what the fuck was that? And you mentioned how awesome the reveal is. I'll let you talk about it in a second. But just this concept of them being chased and all of a sudden they're hitting the wall. The idea that the big reveal with this mystery going on, with the chase sequence going on, it all adds to the drama and tension. And then the big reveal. What I love was the smacking through the concrete the most. But this whole reveal, I think, is just tremendous. And the way they dig it out, I think, is even incredible, because they actually had to build the actual worm that size, stuff it, and then put it in, shoot it, and then you got poor Kevin Bacon in the foreground or in the background of the shot to add scale to it to make it seem like it's 20 feet long.
There are a lot of really good digging scenes throughout, and I think that's part of what makes the movie good. And again, when you have those practical elements, the movie just feels so much more tactile. Like they're actually in the desert. They're on real horses. The horses are actually being assaulted. Like, clearly they're using fake horses at times, but it feels so much more real. I love the fast cuts, so you can't really tell. But those are the things that really stand out. I love a movie that feels just so tactile and real, and I think that's what this does. The ingenious quality of them, jumping around from rock to rock. I love that part of it. Like, that is a great discovery, and the fact that Fred Ward has trouble with it at first, I think that's a great character moment. Fred Ward is a great that guy. Not quite at the level of a Robert Forster, but it really feels like he is the type of guy that would just eat up in some of these action movies or some of these modern superhero movies. This is a guy that I would have loved to have seen in those kinds of movies, but unfortunately he is no longer with us. But I will say that in this movie he is excellent. He is a great foil for Kevin Bacon. He is just a really, really solid performer. And again, that chemistry with Kevin Bacon really makes this movie feel better. And I will say, in terms of character development, it's really great that we get so many characters. But I have to be honest that when I saw that we had Victor Wong, who was the owner of the local market, And we also had poor Miguel, Tony Gennaro as Miguel. I have to say, I knew that one of these minority characters was going to bite it, and to my lack of surprise, it was Mr. Walter Chang, the owner of the local market, basically being one of the first to die.
Yeah, and the way he died was brutal because you see the hooks of the worms. Actually, let me go back really quick. Let's kind of talk about the rules really quick. I think we kind of skipped that, but when they reveal the worm, right, from the dirt when it dies, they start realizing it's got these external thorns or whatever, giant thorns that help them move through the dirt. So, and they realize there's no eyes, so they're blind, right? They're blind, but they can only hear. So there's where the rules established, right? Um, Once they go back to town, they kind of warn everybody, and it's like there's 3 more out there. I looked on the graphs, and you can see these seismic tremors happening here, and here in 3 different areas. They're still out there. So they're trying to figure out a plan, basically. And then during all this, poor Walter, poor Chang, man. Victor Wong, he has this soda machine. Everyone's trying to stay quiet. It goes off like refrigerators randomly do and make those big noises. The thing pops out of the ground and just swallows him up. And I guess this was supposed to be like a kind of a homage to Quint in Jaws when he got eaten up, because apparently the way it kind of goes back and forth and swayed was kind of like the way that the Bruce the Shark kind of swayed back and forth as it was going back in the water with the body of Robert Shaw. So it's kind of like that, and it's unfortunate. But I think it was just so brutal because they showed you how the tongue works in this case, because it needs to feel, right? Because, it's got no eyes. So the tongue is basically this external animal within itself of like a snake that's kind of got its own personality, and it's got these hooks, and it just hooked Walter, man, or Chang, and it's so brutal because you could feel the hooks in his back and the way it just hooks him in, and it just, I don't know, I thought it was well done. Kevin Bacon mentioned that when he was making the movie that he wasn't sure the practical effects would look good, and he was kind of iffy on it because it was all puppets and stuff, and he said there was practically nothing done in post. It was just all on set. But it looked, in 35 millimeter, I think with that little bit of grain, you can get away with that. In digital today, I don't think you could get away with that. It would look totally fake. But 35 millimeter as that little bit of, time in between the frames to give it that illusion of practicality, which is why practical effects look so much better back in the day on 35 millimeter versus digital now.
We really need, what you're telling me is that we really need to go back to shooting more movies on film.
Believe me, I wish we could, and Tarantino has been doing that forever. But the process of transferring film to digital and then digital back to film for, you know what I mean? Because all the editing bays now, editing programs, on computers now, and that's all digital footage, digitized. Editing bays were back in the day in the 90s when you were literally cutting the editing or editing on 35 millimeter, cutting multiple reels together to create the one giant reel of film. So, little history lesson, folks. In this case, nowadays, it just can't work like that because you're going to see, because digital is so clear that you're going to see it. 35 millimeter is a bit slower in time to capture footage, therefore it just blends in. So stuff like this is not going to work.
Then it sounds like we need to make digital look more like film.
Believe me, I've researched this. It's really tough, man, because filters can never capture the true actual essence. You know what I mean? You can put as many filters as you want on any clear footage to make it look old. And believe me, I tried that when I was a teenager and, in my early 20s doing short films and stuff. And it's never going to look that authentic 35 millimeter. You're going to have to spend the money to do it. And not a lot of people want to do that nowadays. So I get it. And I know this is where kind of like that practical versus CGI thing comes into play. But in this case, it's all about the budget nowadays. And believe me, I wish everything was practical, man. But, it's unfortunate. You see that practicality in this death right here. And then everyone's like, oh, shit, let's get on the roof. Everyone gets on the roof. What happens is Bert and Heather, they don't get the message. So they're still in their basement, and they're making all kinds of noise. And I'll let you describe it because I think it's one of the most awesome scenes I've ever seen in my life. And, for anti-gun laws and stuff like that, this was kind of a payoff to that conspiracy paranoid notion that something is going to come after you and you're going to need like 100 guns in one day?
I mean, you used to literally see every gun known to man at one point in this movie, and I think that works out. I just love the idea that they're seemingly in the store, they think they're safe, and then this refrigerator starts making a lot of noise, and it's like, oh shit, we got to shut this off. They shut it off, but it's too late, and basically their one possible sanctuary is taken away from them. Very, very much reminding me of Dawn of the Dead when they have to go to the roof of the mall too. Not quite a 1-for-1 because they're not running away from zombies, but they are running away from these creatures. And I also love, again, we established rules. We also established that there's 4 of them. And I think that gives you knowing that there's 4 of them gives you an idea of, okay, as they kill them, then it's like, okay, now there's 3, now there's 2, now there's 1. I just think that makes for a better movie-going experience because you're signposting what the goals of the characters have to be, and it's to eliminate these creatures. And I think that's just extremely well done. Another extremely well done moment is the point. So when there's 2 left, they're able to blow one of them up, and it's a great moment. And then they throw this bomb to kill the last one, and the other one spits it out, and the characters have to flee away from it. And this one bomb, or this one piece of dynamite almost, blows up a bunch of the other dynamite, so they only have basically one stick of dynamite left that they can use, and that's kind of a movie trope in its own right. But the way that they signpost things, the way that they set up things, pay them off, I think that's another thing that makes this movie so good. I think Alligator was pretty inconsistent in terms of just not really establishing rules and not really giving you those signposts. I think this movie works so much better because of the fact that it is better organized. It is, quite honestly, better directed. They clearly have a little bit more of a budget. And again, because we are in a small town, you have much more options in terms of geography.
Yeah, so let's talk about Bert and Heather killing the fucking worm in their basement. It's incredible, folks. Like, the thing bursts through the wall because they're in the basement, and they're freaking out, and they just start shooting it. And, of course, you see behind them is this whole collection of all their guns. And they're just shooting it. They run out, grab another gun. They're shooting it. They run out, they grab another gun. And it goes on and on. It is incredible. The first time I saw this as a kid, I watched it on TV. And then I remember reading it later on and rewinding it and watching it multiple times. I find this sequence just so incredible. There's one point where you can clearly see it's a green screen and I'm just ignoring it and I just don't care. But just so many fucking guns and this idea that one day him prepping himself for an event like this and it just comes right to his front door. For a gun nut that the Burt character is, like, it just it's fitting that this happens to him and he's so prepared for it that eventually they just kill it. But what's crazy is that it took an elephant gun, which is extreme. Like, an elephant gun, from what I've read, is like, I mean, you have to break the skin of an elephant, and that is increasing, like, it's super thick. So you need enough pressure to break that. So using an elephant gun on this thing, wow, it's just a smart idea. But I love how Reba used the flare at one point to kind of like burn it. But man, it was one gun after another. I love this fucking scene. I don't know what you think about it, but I think it's just one of the most memorable things about this movie, and that the way they shot it. And there's a follow-up to it because in the sequel, he ends up taking the dead worm that's in his basement, has it professionally stuffed, and then hung on his wall in the basement, Jerome.
That is a pretty fantastic payoff. I mean, look, Bert is the type of person that I would hate in real life he's one of those guys that you hate until the apocalypse comes, and then he's your best friend because, as it turns out, he was probably right. So I think that's kind of where I come down on this. And great casting in terms of you get the dad from Family Ties, who in Family Ties is like this hippie liberal type, and here he is a gun nut conspiracy theorist, and it's a great move. He's so good in this role. His interactions with Melvin are very funny. I know you really like the line when he talks about he wouldn't give him a gun if it was World War III. Then he gives him a gun, but only to give him enough confidence to do what he needs him to do, because the gun is in fact not loaded. just really great attention to detail with his character and his interactions with Melvin. And yeah, that scene was great. A lot of really good action scenes, honestly. I'm trying to think if there were any that were particularly not well done, but for the most part, I would say they work out pretty well.
Yeah, and I love this idea that the worms are getting smarter. And I know you love this idea, especially when we talked about the Spider-Man series about how they're using science as a weapon. In this case, it feels like the worms get smarter, therefore they have to get smarter. And it kind of increases the stakes by the end of the movie. And then you mentioned the last worm spitting out the dynamite, and that's supposedly the leader because that's the worm that was earlier in the movie that actually grabbed onto Earl and Val's truck. And then there was this, like, the head of a dead part of the tongue, the snake thing. And they were like, where did this come from, or blah, blah, blah. And they realized it came from that one because you see it's missing a head on one of its tongues. So it's like full circle. Okay, this is the one that grew out our truck. I want this sucker myself. So, Val throws the dynamite, it gets spit back out. And that tells you that these creatures are, like, increasingly getting smarter. And I think that's kind of one of those things in the series that they also kind of play upon. Like I mentioned, they evolve. And in the later in the Burt trilogy that I call 5, 6, and 7, I think they kind of play with that, and they kind of put them in different locales. So they got one in Antarctica and one like in an island setting or whatever. So they kind of develop differently into different kind of worms, which makes sense because these worms actually look kind of brown anyway, so that kind of fits that desert feel to them. So in terms of the look of the worms, I think they kind of evolved throughout the whole series, but they got it down. But they always have the idea that the worms are getting smarter, or the creatures are evolving and getting smarter. And I really like that. And you mentioned attention to detail. The worms know they're on the roof. So what they're doing is, like, they're trying to knock the buildings down. I thought that's so smart. And not only that, when they get the cat construction thing and they put everyone on that trailer hitch, the worms set a trap for the humans, folks. I mean, that is so smart because it kind of goes back to Jaws, like, this damn shark is smart. He gone under the boat. In this case, like, we know it's under the building, but in this case, like, they dug a hole for them to fall in so they would have to run away. It was just very smart on the worms to do that. But then they had to counter that smartness with, drawing them in with the TNT. And it kind of builds to this finale, like Jerome mentioned. All the dynamite's gone. They're stuck out there, kind of stranded. You got Val, Earl, and Rhonda kind of like in the middle of the desert, away from the rocks because they ran away from the explosion. They had to get to safety. So they realize that they're kind of like near the edge of this cliff, and Val realizes that. And then it's kind of like this joke at the beginning of the movie that he played on Earl about a stampede. And then he thought of it stampede, and all of a sudden he realizes that he can draw in the worm. The worm can't see the fucking cliff. And then if he jumps at the right time, the worm's just going to go straight through and fall off the top. And that's exactly what he does. Now, I mentioned last week an alligator where I wanted to see the alligator explode. Jerome, what did we see at the end of this movie when this fucking worm just went flat down?
We saw an explosion.
It was incredible. And the fact that there's not red blood, it's like orange goo, and everyone's covered in it when things are exploding, which they pay off in the second one because that becomes a joke in the second one when they're blowing up more graboids. There's a lot more. They're using dynamite, but then Earl has to use an umbrella when he's hunting them because all these body parts are falling on top of him. So that kind of ties into the second one. But in this case, it's like, wow, they built that thing. They filmed it. Even though it was a miniature, it looked incredible the way that this thing just landed on like hard rocks from like 6 or 7 stories high and just went splat. It was awesome. And it's, again, these incredible visuals in this movie. Like, when I mentioned the basement scene with Bert, in this case, the flying worm. And then, of course, I mentioned the one-liners, and Kevin Bacon's like, "Can you fly, you sucker? Can you fly?" And originally this movie was PG-13, or excuse me, R, but they took out the F words to make it PG-13, which in hindsight they should have just never changed it anyway because it would have made the same amount of money. But it's supposed to be "fly, you fucker, can you fly?" And there's some clearly other dub lines which bother me because it doesn't match, and they never needed to do it anyway because it didn't gross PG-13 kind of money anyway. So that's one of my nitpicks of this movie is the dubbing over the F words and whatnot. And I think they cut out shit a couple times too, which is ridiculous. But I thought that was just being a little overprotective, and you can clearly see the dub not matching the line. But Yeah, it still works. I mean, I wish he said, "Can you fly, you fucker? Can you fly?" I think that would have been more memorable. Kind of like yippee motherfucker. Both falling from a high, high distance, high. So I get it, man. But yeah, it works. But I wish it was the F word. And this movie ends on a high note with Val and Rhonda kissing. Originally, they weren't getting together at the end, and the test audiences really wanted them to get together, and they filmed like that, them kissing at the end of the movie as like 1 day extra. Like that's probably one of their few scenes they had to shoot post the original schedule. You know what I mean? Like extra weeks of shooting or whatever. So it all worked out, and I think that ending works out. And in the mythos and the lore of the series, you find out that they get married and move away from the desert and try to get away from it all. So yeah, just a great ending, and I'm just glad that you're on board with this, and I need you to watch the sequel.
Yeah, I will definitely consider watching at least the second one. I am not sure that I will go far beyond that, but yeah, I will say I think this movie exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, my rating is 8 out of 10. And I feel like every time I watch this, I find little details here and there, even more so. Like I just realized Melvin was alone, and I was like looking up, where's Melvin's parents? And then it turns out they're in Vegas. So there's all these little details, man. But your overall rating?
7.5 out of 10. This was far better than I expected it, and I think it works out really well.
For sure. And the strengths, as we mentioned before, great cast, great chemistry. I mean, Reba McEntire and Michael Gross feel like a real couple, and I think this movie like really helped Reba McEntire's career in terms of acting, because it felt like Michael Gross was kind of like rubbing off on her, considering he came from the sitcom background himself, and this was kind of like her first role. And crazy enough, I know this was 1990, but at this point, I looked it up. Reba McEntire had 12 albums, 12 already out at this point. And she would go on to be a successful, sitcom actress leading her own sitcom. So, she's had a great career, and I think she's really underrated as an actress. And I think she's really, really good in this role. And it just fits naturally for her. And she's not doing the sitcom gimmick, but she's doing like, not, MAGA necessarily. There was no MAGA back then, but the Republican ideal of 1990, she was kind of doing that. And it kind of fit with her, and what Bert were doing. I thought Val and Earl, great bromance, of course, and I even think Val and Rhonda, they got their own kind of chemistry going on as well. So there's all these great characters as well, and Miguel lives, people. Miguel lived. I thought he was gonna die. Even when I was a kid, I was like, this guy's gonna die. He's not a famous actor. He's just gonna die, and he dies. He didn't die, so I was happy for that. And there were some fun kills in this movie, obviously, and of course, I think the old couple at the beginning is just so heartbreaking, because I mean it's terrifying the way that she dies, because she knows that she can't escape the car, and there's no keys, and the car gets sucked down, and all of a sudden the sand pressurizes and collapses the windows, and she's about to suffocate as well. So that's very horrifying. A lot going on for this movie. The creature design is great, and it's got constant rewatch value. And that's kind of where I'm at on the strengths. I think we're all in agreement on everything, right, for the strengths.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, I would agree with you. I think there is, I think there's a couple weaknesses, but for the most part, I think we're in sync on the strengths.
Yeah, for me, the weaknesses, like I mentioned, is just that poor dubbing, because it's clear. Like I used to think that was just the TV version, and then I'm watching I remember watching the VHS version and the DVD and even the Blu-ray version. And it's just, a poor dub, and it's unfortunate, because even with the PG-13 rating, it would not have made a difference. I think just released it as R.
This movie would have been much more appealing if it was R-rated.
I think so too. I think you would have made more money, honestly. So it's just the way you market your movie. And of course, in the Kevin Bacon interview, he mentions that like they didn't know how to market this, and they decided to do it as a monster focus, not the comedy focus. And you can tell on the VHS, the poster cover, that they don't reveal the monster, which is good, but they reveal like the snake part of it, which is always kind of throwing people off whenever they see this movie for the first time, because I'm sure you thought it was like a snake thing, when it turns out that was just part of the tongue. So I thought that was a good little, way to reveal, but not reveal everything when it comes to the marketing and merchandising. So I thought they did a good job with that. And one thing is that I didn't like the lack of detail of the town. Like, I know we got the map of the town. We knew exactly where the worms were coming from. But in this case, I just felt like, where's the cops? How do they get to a doctor? Is there really just one phone in town? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of details they just skipped over. But because it's 1990, you're not really thinking about who's got a cell phone, who's got internet, all that bullshit. That goes out the window because it's 1990. So even if they remake the movie today, you could, I guess, put it in 2023. But I would much prefer they throw it back into the 90s, eliminate all the technology, and get back to what, suspense really was before technology and cell phones and stuff. Because suspense in movies has clearly changed because of cell phones. So I don't know if that's another lesson for another day in terms of writing. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's why you're getting so many movies that are not taking place in current times, and a lot of movies and TV shows are wanting to go back to the 80s and the 90s when there were no phones. I think it is a huge concern that I think it's only going to increase. I think you're only going to continue to see more movies that take place in the past because cell phones can really rob you of the drama.
But in contrary to that, I like Ninja Turtles, the animated movie that came out, which did the opposite, made in 2023. I just didn't understand what the kids were saying because they're teenagers and they're on TikTok and they're saying all this TikTok shit that I didn't understand.
I mean, the whole
but
point.
That's the point. That's the point.
That's the point, is that they are supposed to be talking over each other.
Right. That's the 2023 of it all. But if you did a Ninja Turtles movie today taking place in 1990, of course, it would still have that weird feel without the cell phones, but at least they adapted to the modern era. So it can be done. Can be done. MVP Ron Underwood, I think he did a tremendous job directing. Directing a desert setting like this, actually wanting to go on location, practical effects, all that stuff. I mean, he held the ship together and he casted a great cast together, and I think he did a great job. I think you were on the same page as me.
Yep, we have the same MVP and we have the same best performance as well.
Fred Ward, man, my God, totally deserving. But in this case, it was kind of tough because I felt like Michael Ross kind of was competing with him. But I feel like Michael Ross takes over the series post this because he's in every movie after this, all 7 of them. So yeah, that's kind of where his career
In a world where this movie is a hit, I think Fred Ward has a second coming in terms of getting bigger and better movies.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because he's so good in this, and it's like the only reward that he got was Naked Gun 3 and then the sequel, which was actually kind of successful in terms of money and VHS money, rental wise.
Yeah,
so.
That's Naked Gun the third is easily the worst of the 3, so it sucks, but that's the career or the trajectory of a journeyman actor.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, man. But like I said, it feels like John Bernthal is the second coming of Fred Ward, and I'm pretty sure they did stuff together. I just can't think of it now. But that's if they ever do that remake. But overall, I love this movie to death. It's definitely worth owning. Like I got the Blu-ray. I'm probably gonna get a 4K version of it soon because watching the Blu-ray, I was like, man, I want to even see this in clearer quality. Even Kevin Bacon mentioned in his interview, like, he loves that over the years the quality of this movie, like the visual quality, has gone up because VHS degraded quality, and over the years it went on DVD and on Blu-ray. And as as technology gets better and the transfer gets better, this movie's going to look even more beautiful because of the desert setting, I think. So I think we're both in agreement in that. So that's it for Tremors 1990. Not a box office success, but a big cult classic that a lot of people grew up with, and a lot of families love this movie. Even my aunts, who are not really horror fans, love this movie and the second one. So I think that says a lot. And I remember watching it during like family gatherings in the 90s. This one and the second one when it was on TV, and it was like the perfect movie to put on the background during family dinners or something like that, like a family gathering, if there wasn't sports on. But that's kind of how. Exactly. That's kind of how I relate to this movie a lot, because a lot of people in my family actually love this movie too. So next week we're gonna kind of change trajectory. It's Stephen Summers. We mentioned him when we watched The Mummy. We're both gonna watch Deep Rising, and both of us have never seen this movie before, but I've been recommended this movie by a lot of people, and they say it's really good. And it turns out that this movie, Deep Rising, 1998, was actually going to be an origin story or like a prequel to an actual King Kong movie that was going to come out, directed by Stephen Sommers, that never came out. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting discussion. It's got an interesting cast. We'll talk about Treat Williams, who recently passed away. So he's the star of the movie. So that kind of is very fitting, in a strange kind of way. So we could talk about him and talk about this movie that's kind of gone under the radar, but in a similar way, kind of has this cult classic status, but in the digital kind of streaming way or streaming age. So we'll talk about that next week. And yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Never, ever be a Melvin.